Pain is inevitable, but suffering is a choice. When you master your mind, nothing and nobody can touch your peace. You become unshakable. Insults slide off. Loss is met with resilience. Betrayal sharpens your strength. But if you remain vulnerable to the opinions and actions of others, you hand them your power. True invincibility is built within, not granted by the world. Will you fortify your mind or keep surrendering it to the storms of life? The choice is yours, and it changes everything. In just a few moments, you'll learn how to make your mind unbreakable, so nobody and nothing can hurt you again. You are untouchable when you control your mind. When you gain command over your thoughts, you become invincible against the arrows of criticism, the daggers of doubt, and the bullets of betrayal. Picture this moment. Standing firm amidst a storm while others are swept away, maintaining perfect composure when chaos surrounds you, smiling confidently when challenges mount. This mental fortress isn't built overnight. It emerges brick by brick, thought by thought, decision by decision, until one day you realize that external circumstances no longer dictate your internal state. What once pierced your heart now bounces off your mental armor. Those who master their mind have discovered the secret to becoming truly untouchable. Why does mental control create this shield of invulnerability? Because everything in life, every emotion, every reaction, every pain must first pass through the gateway of your thoughts before affecting you. Consider this truth. No person can make you feel inferior without your permission. No circumstance can devastate you without your mental cooperation. The world's greatest achievers throughout history understood that control over one's thoughts translates directly into control over one's destiny. When you decide what enters your mental space and what doesn't, you effectively determine what influences your life and what becomes irrelevant background noise. So how do you develop this mental mastery that renders you untouchable? Start by becoming the vigilant gatekeeper of your thoughts. Examine each idea that attempts entry. Does it serve your highest good or undermine your potential? Practice detached observation of negative emotions without becoming them. Spend 15 minutes each morning in perfect silence, directing your thoughts deliberately toward your deepest objectives. Create distance between stimulus and response through strategic pauses. Surround yourself with materials and individuals who strengthen rather than weaken your mental resolve. Remember that your mind grows in whatever direction you consistently feed it. Choose nourishment that builds resilience. Eunice Waymont, born in a small town with dreams bigger than her circumstances, she faced blatant rejection when attempting to study classical piano due to her race. Rather than internalizing this pain, she transformed it into fuel. By controlling her mental response to discrimination, she channeled her talents differently, eventually becoming one of the most influential musical voices of her generation. When critics attacked her unconventional style, when venues refused her performances, when the industry tried to mold her into something more marketable, she remained psychologically untouchable. Her mind belonged to her alone, and from that sovereignty came her undeniable power. Have you ever noticed how two people can experience identical circumstances, yet emerge with completely different outcomes? What separates the person crushed by criticism from the one who grows stronger through it? What distinguishes the entrepreneur who collapses after failure from the one who builds an empire from those same ruins? The difference lies not in external forces, but in mental management. Are you currently allowing people's opinions to penetrate your psychological boundaries? Are temporary setbacks dictating your sense of self-worth? Might your greatest limitation be the unguarded nature of your thoughts, rather than the obstacles before you? The moment you fully comprehend that nothing has power over you except that which you grant through your thinking, that's when true freedom begins. Your untouchable nature awaits your recognition. Your emotions can't break you when you build your shield. Your emotions arrive like waves, sometimes gentle ripples, sometimes crushing tsunamis, but their power to harm you dissolves completely when you construct your emotional shield. Envision this reality. Tears fall, but don't consume you. Anger rises, but doesn't control you. Fear appears, but doesn't paralyze you. This emotional fortification represents the difference between living at the mercy of feelings versus commanding them with wisdom and purpose. The shield doesn't eliminate emotions. it transforms your relationship with them. Instead of being tossed about on stormy emotional seas, you become the steady lighthouse, observing the tempest without being damaged by it. Those who build this protective barrier discover a profound truth. Feelings can inform you without defining you. Why does emotional sovereignty create this impenetrable defense? Because emotions, when unmanaged, become the primary vehicle through which life's difficulties inflict their deepest wounds. Without your shield, rejection crushes confidence, criticism burns motivation, and disappointment poisons hope. The most impressive achievement stories reveal individuals who didn't eliminate their emotional responses, but rather channeled them productively. Your capacity to experience emotion represents one of your greatest human gifts, but only when harnessed rather than surrendered to. When you establish healthy boundaries around your emotional life, you essentially determine which feelings deserve your energy and which warrant mere acknowledgement before release. So, how do you construct this emotional shield that renders wounds powerless? Begin by recognizing emotions as messengers rather than masters. Practice naming feelings precisely as they emerge. This simple act creates immediate distance. Establish daily rituals that process emotions healthily before they accumulate, perhaps journaling, physical movement, or confidential conversations with trusted allies. Consciously disrupt destructive emotional patterns by introducing deliberate pauses when triggered. Remember that emotional endurance builds like physical strength through consistent training rather than avoidance. Feed your emotional resilience through inspiration, rest, connection, and gratitude. Most importantly, practice accepting emotions without attaching your identity to them. Margaret Hendricks. As the first woman appointed to a prestigious financial institution's board, she encountered vicious personal attacks, questioning her capabilities based purely on gender. Rather than allowing humiliation and resentment to derail her mission, she crafted an exceptional emotional shield. When colleagues deliberately excluded her from critical meetings, when news scrutinized her personal life while ignoring male counterparts' achievements, when investors threatened withdrawal based on outdated beliefs, she maintained unwavering emotional equilibrium, not through coldness or detachment, but through mastery of her emotional responses. Her shield wasn't about feeling nothing. It was about choosing which feelings deserved her precious energy. Have you noticed certain emotions consistently derail your progress toward meaningful goals? What would become possible if disappointment no longer devastated you for days, but merely informed you for moments? Could your current emotional patterns be habits rather than inevitabilities? Might your greatest triumphs await just beyond the emotional storms you've been avoiding? Consider this possibility. Perhaps emotional pain persists not because of external circumstances, but because of internal permission. The truth remains that emotions themselves cause far less damage than our undisciplined responses to them. Your unshakable nature doesn't require emotional elimination, but emotional integration. When you grasp that emotions can enrich your experience without controlling your direction, that's when genuine freedom emerges. Your shield awaits your construction. Transform every pain into your greatest power. Your deepest wounds contain the seeds of your most extraordinary strengths when you master the alchemy of transforming pain into power. Imagine this transformation. Betrayal becomes discernment. Rejection breeds independence. Failure cultivates wisdom, and loss generates appreciation. This remarkable conversion doesn't happen automatically or overnight. It emerges through deliberate reframing, through asking better questions, through extracting lessons from suffering, until one day you realize the very experiences designed to destroy you have, instead, distinguished you. What once threatened to break you now builds your unique competitive advantage. Those who master this transformation discover they no longer fear life's difficulties because they've learned to mine them for hidden treasures. Why does pain carry this potential for extraordinary power? Because hardship creates pressure, and pressure, properly harnessed, produces diamonds from coal. The world's most impactful individuals didn't succeed despite their suffering, but frequently because of how they transmuted it. Your painful experiences contain concentrated lessons, unavailable through comfortable circumstances. They stress test your character, revealing both weaknesses needing reinforcement and hidden strengths awaiting deployment. Most significantly, pain creates the contrast necessary to recognize and appreciate triumph. Without the darkness, how would you fully comprehend the light? When you reinterpret suffering as investment rather than punishment, you unlock energy previously trapped in resentment or regret. So how do you perform this remarkable transformation from wound to wisdom? Start by abandoning the why me question in favor of what now. Thoroughly examine painful situations for their educational value. What does this difficulty reveal about yourself, others, or life's principles? Practice conscious reframing. Ask how this challenge might serve rather than hinder your ultimate objective. Extract the gift within each hardship, perhaps increased resilience, deeper empathy, or greater clarity about priorities. Create meaning from suffering through service to others facing similar trials. Remember that pain transforms into power most effectively when channeled toward purpose beyond yourself. Most importantly, refuse to grant permanent residence to temporary emotions. Takeo Fukui bent to extreme poverty with significant physical limitations. Conventional wisdom predicted limited prospects. Rather than surrendering to disadvantage, he systematically converted each barrier into a building block. When educational institutions rejected his applications despite exceptional scores, when potential employers dismissed his capabilities based on appearance, when financial constraints threatened his innovations, he transformed these rejections into resolute self-reliance. The discrimination that might have embittered him instead inspired revolutionary designs accommodating diverse physical abilities. His engineering breakthroughs emerged directly from personal limitations, ultimately transforming transportation accessibility for millions. His pain didn't just produce personal power, it created widespread progress. Are you currently viewing certain painful experiences purely as obstacles rather than opportunities? What wounds might contain wisdom you haven't yet extracted? Could your greatest setbacks potentially become your defining advantages with proper interpretation? Might your present difficulties be preparing you for future opportunities requiring precisely the strength being forged through current challenges? Consider this perspective shift. Perhaps your most painful experiences aren't punishments, but preparations. The capacity to transform pain into power distinguishes those who merely endure life from those who conquer it. Your hardships don't diminish your potential. Properly processed, they dramatically expand it. When you fully comprehend that pain represents raw material awaiting conversion rather than a sentence without purpose, that's when genuine transformation begins. Your greatest power awaits within your deepest pain. Unbreakable confidence comes from within. Your confidence becomes absolutely unshakable when built upon internal foundations rather than external validation. Picture this reality: presenting bold ideas without requiring approval, pursuing ambitious goals despite skepticism, maintaining self-belief amid criticism, and walking away from toxic situations without self-doubt. This unwavering self-assurance doesn't spring from arrogance or delusion. It emerges from intimate self-acknowledge, from recognizing your inherent value separate from accomplishments, from honoring commitments to yourself with the same seriousness you give promises to others. What once required constant external reinforcement now flows naturally from within. Those who cultivate this internal confidence discover an astonishing truth. They no longer live hostage to others' evaluations because they've established their own unshakable standard. Why does internally generated confidence provide this bulletproof protection? Because confidence built on external validation remains perpetually vulnerable to outside forces beyond your control. The most compelling leadership examples throughout history reveal individuals who maintained unwavering self-belief despite initial public skepticism. Your capacity to trust yourself represents the foundation upon which all other success rises or falls. When your sense of worth emanates from within, rejection loses its sting, criticism becomes merely information, and failure transforms into education. Most crucially, internal confidence creates the courage necessary to maintain integrity when compromise would be easier. So, how do you develop this unbreakable confidence that sustains you regardless of external circumstances? Begin by conducting a thorough personal inventory. Identify strengths without false modesty and weaknesses without harsh judgment. Practice conscientious self-care, treating yourself with the consideration you'd offer a valued friend. Establish a robust personal integrity system where promises to yourself hold equal importance to commitments to others. Document victories, both small and significant, to create concrete evidence countering self-doubt. Deliberately seek challenges slightly beyond current capabilities, then celebrate growth regardless of outcome. Remember that confidence, like any muscle, strengthens through consistent resistance training. Feed your self-belief daily through affirmation, visualization, and evidence-based reflection. Solomon Nyenteki. Despite extraordinary academic potential, educational opportunities remain severely limited by economic and social barriers. Rather than internalizing external limitations as personal inadequacy, he cultivated unshakable self-belief. When prestigious institutions initially rejected his applications, when colleagues questioned his qualifications based on background rather than merit, when financial constraints threatened his research continuity, his confidence never wavered. Not through blind positivity, but through clear-eyed self-acknowledge. He recognized capabilities others hadn't yet witnessed and persisted until groundbreaking agricultural innovations transformed regional food security. His confidence wasn't loud or boastful. It manifested as quiet, consistent self-trust despite overwhelming external doubt. Have you noticed certain situations consistently undermine your confidence? What becomes possible when your self-belief no longer requires constant external reinforcement? Could your current confidence challenges stem from seeking validation from sources incapable of truly understanding your vision? Might your most authentic achievements await just beyond the approval-seeking patterns currently limiting your boldest expressions? Consider this reality. Perhaps confidence struggles persist not because you're lacking, but because you're looking outward for what can only be generated within. The truth remains that sustainable confidence cannot be given or taken by others. It must be internally cultivated and protected. Your unshakable nature doesn't require universal approval, but unwavering self-trust. When you grasp that confidence represents a choice rather than a circumstance, that's when genuine liberation begins. Your unbreakable confidence awaits your recognition. Master your reply to master your life. Your complete liberation emerges when you master your response to external forces rather than attempting to control them. Envision this mastery, maintaining perfect peace amid chaos, converting obstacles into opportunities, finding humor during hardship, and creating value from situations others consider worthless. This response sovereignty doesn't suggest pretending difficulties don't exist. It means developing such command over your reactions that you extract advantage from any circumstance life presents. What once appeared as insurmountable problems now register as interesting challenges worthy of your creative engagement. Those who achieve this response mastery discover an extraordinary truth. They need not control external conditions because they've perfected control over their internal condition. Why does response mastery create this unparalleled freedom? Because while external circumstances remain largely outside your jurisdiction, your responses remain entirely within it. History's most consequential figures demonstrated not immunity from difficulties, but remarkable capacity to fashion constructive responses to them. Your power to choose reactions rather than succumb to reflexes represents your most decisive advantage in any situation. When you cultivate intentional responses rather than automatic reactions, setbacks become temporary rather than terminal. Criticism becomes informative rather than destructive, and failures become educational rather than definitional. Most significantly, response sovereignty prevents external forces from determining your internal state. So how do you develop this response mastery that transforms every external challenge into internal victory? Start by creating deliberate space between stimulus and response, the momentary pause that permits choice rather than compulsion. Practice reframing adverse situations through alternative perspectives. What opportunities might exist within this apparent problem? Develop questions that automatically redirect your focus during difficulties. What can I learn here? Or how might I use this? Strengthen your contextual awareness by regularly zooming outward from immediate circumstances to broader patterns and purposes. Remember that response muscles, like physical ones, develop through consistent resistance training rather than comfortable repetition. Feed your response sovereignty through studying how history's greatest achievers converted crushing defeats into defining victories. Victoria Woodhull, faced with seemingly impenetrable barriers to participation in financial markets based on gender, she developed extraordinary response mastery when established institutions rejected her participation despite demonstrated aptitude, when media attacks targeted her character rather than her ideas, when regulatory obstacles threatened her innovative approaches. She refused reactive indignation in favor of strategic recalibration. Rather than exhausting energy fighting systems designed against her success, she created parallel structures that eventually transformed the very marketplace that initially excluded her. Her response sovereignty wasn't about passive acceptance, but strategic redirection. Her strength manifested not in controlling unchangeable circumstances, but in controlling her engagement with them. Are you currently expending precious energy trying to change immovable external conditions rather than mastering your response to them? What possibilities might emerge if you redirected that same intensity toward internal sovereignty? Could your greatest current frustrations actually represent disguised opportunities for demonstrating creative response? Might your present challenges be perfectly designed to develop precisely the response muscles required for your next level of achievement? Consider this fundamental shift. Perhaps your circumstances appear limiting, not because of their inherent nature, but because of your habitual reactions to them. The truth remains that external conditions hold power over your experience only to the extent you grant through unmanaged responses. Your liberation doesn't require controlling the uncontrollable, but mastering what remains forever within your control. When you fully comprehend that circumstances don't determine your destiny, but merely reveal your response patterns, that's when genuine mastery begins. Your sovereignty awaits your recognition. Daily decisions determine your destiny. Your life's trajectory isn't shaped by occasional monumental choices, but by the consistent daily decisions you make when nobody's watching. Visualize this compounding effect. Small disciplines accumulating into towering achievements. Minor compromises deteriorating into major character flaws. Tiny improvements snowballing into transformative progress. This decision architecture doesn't announce itself dramatically. It operates quietly, moment by moment, choice by choice, building your future while you remain barely conscious of its construction. What appears as sudden success or failure actually represents the inevitable outcome of thousands of seemingly insignificant decisions. Those who master this decision awareness discover an empowering truth. They need not control circumstances because they've mastered the choices governing their response to any circumstance. Why do daily decisions carry this extraordinary destiny-shaping power? Because life follows the principle of compound interest applied to character and capability. History's most remarkable achievers rarely possessed unusual talent, but demonstrated unusual decision consistency. Your seemingly minor choices determine your information diet, your relationship quality, your health trajectory, and ultimately your opportunity landscape. When you recognize that decisions compound rather than simply accumulate, suddenly those small integrity choices, learning investments, and self-discipline moments take on monumental significance. Most crucially, decision sovereignty prevents external influences from hijacking your trajectory through unconscious habit formation. So how do you harness this decision power to deliberately design your destiny? Start by conducting a decision audit. Identify the top 5 daily choices currently shaping your future, positively and negatively. Practice decision consciousness by creating environmental triggers that promote momentary awareness before habitual actions. Establish non-negotiable daily disciplines that anchor your highest priorities regardless of convenience or mood fluctuations. Deliberately engineer your physical spaces to make superior decisions automatic rather than requiring constant willpower. Remember that decision muscles strengthen through consistent exercise, not occasional heroic efforts. Feed your decision quality by studying how history's greatest achievers structured their daily choices to virtually guarantee their eventual success. Raymond Tomlinson contemporaries sought revolutionary technological breakthroughs. He focused instead on making excellent daily decisions regarding seemingly mundane communication problems. Raymond Tomlinson contemporaries sought revolutionary technological breakthroughs. He focused instead on making excellent daily decisions regarding seemingly mundane communication problems. When prestigious research projects tempted his attention away from fundamental connectivity challenges, when colleagues dismissed his interest in basic message transmission as lacking glamour, when financial incentives pulled toward more commercially obvious applications, his decision discipline never wavered, not through dramatic declarations, but through consistent daily choices, allocating his finest thinking hours to solving essential rather than impressive problems. His decision architecture wasn't flashy or attention-seeking. It manifested as quiet, consistent prioritization of foundation-building work that eventually revolutionized global communication infrastructure. Are you currently celebrating occasional heroic efforts while neglecting the daily decisions actually determining your trajectory? What possibilities might emerge if you redirected focus from dramatic outcomes toward consistent decision quality? Could your greatest current frustrations actually reflect the compound interest on previous poor decisions rather than present circumstances? Might your most desired achievements await just beyond a series of seemingly insignificant but aligned daily choices? Consider this fundamental shift, perhaps. Success appears elusive not because you lack capability, but because you've underestimated how thoroughly daily decisions shape destiny. The truth remains that external circumstances influence your future primarily through their impact on your decision patterns. Your destiny ownership begins with decision ownership. When you fully comprehend that life doesn't happen to you, but emerges from these thousands of seemingly minor choices, that's when genuine empowerment begins. Your extraordinary destiny awaits your daily decisions. Your thoughts create your reality. Your entire experience of life flows directly from the quality and direction of your thinking patterns. Envision this causality: expectations becoming experiences, assumptions transforming into perceptions, beliefs manifesting as behaviors, and thoughts crystallizing into circumstances. This thought-reality connection doesn't operate mystically, but psychologically and practically. It shapes how you interpret events, what opportunities you recognize, which actions you consider possible, and ultimately, what results you achieve. What once appeared as random external events now reveals itself as the natural outgrowth of internal mental activity. Those who master their thought patterns discover a transformative truth. They need not constantly battle external conditions because they've learned to address those conditions at their source. Why do thoughts wield this reality-creating power? Because your mind operates as both filter and projector, determining what you notice and how you respond to everything you experience. Historical analysis of extraordinary achievers reveals not unusual circumstances, but unusual thought patterns about common circumstances. Your mental activity determines which information receives focus, what meaning gets assigned to events, which responses seem available, and what level of persistence appears warranted. When you recognize that thoughts precede and shape every aspect of experience, suddenly mental management becomes not optional self-improvement, but essential life navigation. Most significantly, thought mastery prevents circumstances from controlling your internal condition through automatic interpretation habits. So how do you harness these thought patterns to deliberately design your reality? Begin by conducting a thought inventory. Identify recurring mental patterns, creating both empowerment and limitation in your experience. Practice thought consciousness through regular intervals of deliberate mental observation without judgment. Establish specific replacement patterns for disempowering thoughts that currently divert your energy and focus. Engineer your information environment to support mental patterns aligned with your highest aspirations. Remember that thought habits, like physical ones, transform through consistent new input rather than occasional inspiration. Feed your thought quality by studying how history's most consequential figures maintained extraordinary mental discipline amid challenging external circumstances. Gertrude Elion, encountering pervasive gender barriers in scientific research, she maintained thought patterns fundamentally different from equally talented contemporaries. When research positions remained closed despite exceptional qualifications, when laboratory colleagues dismissed contributions based on gender rather than merit, when academic publications rejected submissions without substantive review, her thought discipline remained uncompromised. Rather than internalizing external limitations, she consistently directed thinking toward unexplored research avenues accessible despite institutional barriers. Her thought mastery wasn't about positive platitudes, but strategic mental allocation. She refused to waste precious cognitive resources on resentment, instead investing that same mental energy into innovative problem solving that eventually transformed pharmaceutical development against conditions previously considered untreatable. Are you currently allowing circumstances to dictate your thought patterns rather than using thought patterns to transform your circumstances? What possibilities might emerge if you redirected the mental energy currently spent analyzing problems toward envisioning solutions? Could your greatest present limitations actually reflect thought boundaries rather than external barriers? Might your desired achievements await just beyond updated thought patterns about what's possible for someone with your background and resources? Consider this paradigm shift. Perhaps success appears distant, not because external conditions oppose you, but because internal thought patterns haven't aligned with its requirements. The truth remains that circumstances influence your experience primarily through the thoughts you maintain about them. Your reality creation begins with thought creation. When you fully comprehend that conditions don't create thoughts, but thoughts create conditions, that's when genuine transformation begins. Your extraordinary reality awaits your thought patterns. Fear disobles when fear grows paralyzing power completely, when overshadowed by compelling purpose. Imagine this transformation: speaking confidently to large audiences despite previous social anxiety, pursuing ambitious objectives despite criticism, concerns, initiating crucial conversations despite rejection possibilities, and taking calculated risks despite failure potential. This fear transcendence doesn't occur through elimination, but through substitution, replacing fear's dominance with purpose's greater magnetism. What once stopped you cold now barely registers as background noise during purpose-driven action. Those who discover sufficiently meaningful purpose find an empowering truth. They need not become fearless because they've become purpose-focused. Why does purpose create this fear-dissolving effect? Because meaningful purpose activates motivational forces that simply overpower fear's protective mechanisms. History's most consequential contributors rarely experienced less fear than contemporaries, but possessed purposes compelling enough to render those fears irrelevant. Your brain prioritizes perceived threats as survival mechanism, but when purpose engages deeper identity and meaning centers, protection concerns become secondary to contribution imperatives. When clear purpose establishes why action remains essential despite discomfort, suddenly feeling ready becomes unnecessary for forward movement. Most crucially, purpose prevents fear from functioning as decision maker by establishing superior selection criteria. So, how do you develop purpose powerful enough to neutralize even your most persistent fears? Start by identifying areas where fear currently constrains your highest potential. Then explore what purpose might prove compelling enough to override those specific concerns. Practice purpose amplification by connecting immediate actions to their furthest reaching positive implications. Read Establish Purpose reminders that trigger automatically during fear activation moments. Strengthen your purpose clarity through regular contemplation of what contribution would make your unique journey worthwhile, regardless of public recognition. Remember that purpose muscles, like physical ones, develop through consistent stretching beyond comfortable limits. Feed your purpose quality by studying how history's most impactful individuals maintained unwavering mission focus despite legitimate reasons for caution. To Hideo Noguchi, experiencing profound social anxiety that made professional interactions extraordinarily uncomfortable. His purpose concerning disease eradication generated momentum that consistently overpowered psychological barriers. When speaking at international conferences despite paralyzing stage fright, when advocating controversial research approaches despite criticism anxiety, when directing diverse research teams despite communication apprehension, his purpose commitment never faltered, not through fearlessness, but through purpose prioritization. His purpose focus wasn't about ignoring legitimate concerns, but about maintaining unwavering concentration on outcomes significant enough to justify enduring those concerns. The diseases he helped address through this purpose-driven persistence saved countless lives that would have been lost had he allowed fear to dictate his professional boundaries. Are you currently allowing fears to establish your action parameters rather than using purpose to contextualize those fears appropriately? What contributions might become possible if you redirected focus from fear reduction toward purpose expansion? Could your greatest current limitations actually reflect purpose insufficiency rather than excessive fear? Might your most meaningful achievements await just beyond fear barriers that would instantly dissolve before sufficiently compelling purpose? Consider this fundamental reorientation. Perhaps fear maintains its power not because you lack courage, but because you haven't yet connected with purpose magnetic enough to override protection instincts. The truth remains that fears influence behavior primarily when purpose lacks sufficient clarity and significance. Your liberation begins with purpose amplification. When you fully comprehend that fear management requires not fear elimination, but purpose elevation, that's when genuine freedom begins. Your fearless impact awaits your purposeful focus. Relationships determine your elevation. Your growth trajectory becomes virtually unlimited when you master the art of strategic relationship cultivation. Visualize this acceleration, accessing decades of wisdom through mentorship without personally experiencing every costly lesson, multiplying your impact through collaboration beyond individual capability, receiving honest feedback, exposing blind spots, invisible to personal reflection, and encountering opportunities beyond your current network's boundaries. This relationship leverage doesn't develop accidentally or overnight. It emerges through deliberate connection cultivation, through mutual value creation, through consistent gratitude expression, until one day you realize your growth rate has fundamentally changed. What once required years of isolated effort now happens through months of connected expansion. Those who master relationship development discover a transformational truth. They need not know everything or do everything because they've connected with those who complement their limitations. Why do relationships create this extraordinary elevation potential? Because human achievement operates as a profoundly social rather than individual phenomenon. Historical analysis of breakthrough contributors reveals not isolated geniuses, but individuals embedded within powerful relationship networks. Your connection quality determines your information access, your opportunity visibility, your resource availability, and ultimately your achievement ceiling. When you recognize that relationships function as growth accelerators rather than mere social pleasantries, suddenly strategic connection cultivation becomes essential infrastructure rather than optional networking. Most significantly, relationship mastery prevents capability limitations from constraining your impact through complementary collaboration. So how do you develop relationship patterns that consistently elevate rather than merely entertain? Begin by conducting a relationship audit. Identify which current connections consistently expand your thinking, challenge your limitations, and connect you with growth opportunities. Practice deliberate value creation by systematically identifying how you might contribute to others' success before requesting anything in return. Establish relationship cultivation rituals that ensure consistent investment in your most growth-accelerating connections despite busy schedules. Engineer your environmental patterns to regularly expose you to individuals operating beyond your current achievement level. Remember that relationship muscles, like physical ones, strengthen through consistent service rather than occasional extraction. Feed your relationship quality by studying how history's most consequential figures systematically built connection networks that compensated for personal limitations while amplifying unique strengths. Mortimer Adler contemporaries pursued independent intellectual contributions. He focused instead on relationship systems that connected diverse thinkers across traditional boundaries. When academic recognition favored specialized individual publication, when institutional structures rewarded departmental loyalty over interdisciplinary collaboration, when funding patterns supported isolated research rather than integrative dialogue, his relationship focus remained unwavering, not through social pleasantries, but through strategic connection architecture designed specifically to accelerate collective wisdom development. His relationship mastery wasn't about popularity, but purposeful network cultivation that eventually transformed educational access for millions by connecting previously isolated knowledge domains through strategic relationship bridges. Are you currently measuring success through independent accomplishment rather than collaborative elevation? What possibilities might emerge if you redirected focus from personal capability development toward strategic relationship cultivation? Could your greatest current limitations actually reflect connection gaps rather than personal deficiencies? Might your most significant achievements await just beyond relationship bridges you haven't yet built intentionally? Consider this fundamental reorientation. Perhaps growth appears constrained, not because you lack potential, but because you've underestimated how thoroughly relationships determine development trajectories. The truth remains that individual capabilities influence your ceiling primarily until relationship mastery removes those limitations altogether. Your exponential growth begins with connection cultivation. When you fully comprehend that elevation speed depends less on personal traits than on relationship quality, that's when genuine acceleration begins. Your extraordinary elevation awaits your relationship mastery. Resilience transforms setbacks into comebacks. Your capacity to transform devastating defeats into defining victories depends entirely upon resilience development. Imagine this alchemical process. Business failures becoming entrepreneurial education, rejections revealing redirection opportunities, health challenges generating deeper appreciation, and relationship disappointments clarifying authentic connection requirements. This resilience alchemy doesn't happen automatically. It emerges through deliberate meaning making, through strategic response selection, through intentional growth extraction, until eventually you realize setbacks that devastate others barely interrupt your forward momentum. What once appeared as momentum-destroying obstacles now register as necessary course corrections, guiding you towards superior destinations. Those who master resilience discover an empowering truth. They need not fear failure because they've learned to transform every setback into setup for stronger comeback. Why does resilience create this setback transmuting power? Because challenges operate not merely as obstacles, but as essential development catalysts when properly processed. Historical examination of remarkable achievers reveals not absence of failure, but extraordinary response to it. Your resilience capacity determines whether difficulties function as terminal events or transformational experiences, whether rejection represents conclusion or redirection, and ultimately whether failure defines or refines your journey. When you recognize that setbacks provide precisely the resistance necessary for strength development, suddenly avoiding difficulties becomes counterproductive rather than strategic. Most significantly, resilience mastery prevents circumstances from dictating your trajectory by establishing internal rather than external response determination. So how do you develop resilience powerful enough to convert any setback into strategic advantage? Start by reframing your relationship with difficulty. Recognize challenges as capacity building rather than progress preventing experiences. Practice immediate meaning searching when facing setbacks by asking what this specific difficulty might be perfectly designed to teach or reveal. Establish resilience rituals that process disappointment productively rather than allowing emotional residue to accumulate unaddressed. Engineer your response patterns to automatically seek opportunity within adversity rather than merely document. Remember that resilience muscles, like physical ones, develop through progressive resistance rather than comfortable repetition. Feed your resilience quality by studying how history's most consequential contributors systematically extracted maximum growth from their most devastating defeats. Clementine Churchill, experiencing personal tragedy that would have permanently sidelined many contemporaries, she developed extraordinary resilience mechanisms that converted grief into purposeful action. When facing devastating personal losses that threatened emotional stability, when encountering institutional resistance that blocked traditional contribution avenues, when weathering public criticism that undermined confidence, her resilience architecture held firm. Not through emotional suppression, but through meaning-making that continuously extracted purpose from pain. Her resilience mastery wasn't about denial, but strategic response selection that consistently transformed personal suffering into expanded capacity for addressing others' suffering. The humanitarian initiatives that emerged directly from her resilience process difficulties eventually improved conditions for countless vulnerable populations that would have remained unserved had she allowed setbacks to determine her contribution trajectory. Are you currently viewing certain setbacks as journey-ending rather than course-correcting experiences? What possibilities might emerge if you redirected energy from setback avoidance toward resilience cultivation? Could your greatest current frustrations actually represent disguised invitations towards superior directions you wouldn't have considered without forced redirection? Might your most significant achievements await directly beyond resilience barriers currently registering as overwhelming obstacles? Consider this fundamental perspective shift. Perhaps success appears delayed not because circumstances oppose you, but because resilience development requires precisely the challenges you're currently facing. The truth remains that difficulties determine your trajectory primarily based on your resilience response rather than their inherent severity. Your extraordinary comeback begins with resilience development. When you fully comprehend that setbacks function as essential components of success rather than contradictions to it, that's when genuine transformation begins. Your remarkable comeback awaits your resilience response. Your mindset determines your possibilities. Your potential remains either imprisoned or unleashed, depending entirely upon the mindset you cultivate daily. Envision this profound difference: seeing problems where others spot opportunities, noticing limitations where others identify advantages, focusing on impossibilities where others discover possibilities, and emphasizing obstacles where others detect stepping stones. This mindset architecture doesn't establish itself overnight. It develops through consistent thought patterns, through habitual focused direction, through repeated interpretation choices, until eventually your perception automatically filters reality through possibility rather than limitation. What once appeared as immovable barriers now register as creative challenges worthy of your engagement. Those who master mindset cultivation discover a liberating truth. They need not change all external circumstances because they've learned to transform their relationship with any circumstance. Why does mindset create this possibility expanding effect? Because perception functions not as neutral observation, but as active creation, filtering all experience through established interpretation patterns. Historical analysis of breakthrough achievers reveals not unusual conditions, but unusual perspectives about common conditions. Your mindset determines which information receives attention, what meaning gets assigned to events, which responses seem reasonable, and ultimately what results appear achievable. When you recognize that mindset operates as reality filter rather than reality reflection, suddenly mental management becomes not optional improvement but essential navigation. Most significantly, mindset mastery prevents circumstances from dictating your possibility landscape by establishing internal rather than external boundary determination. So, how do you develop a mindset that consistently expands rather than contracts your possibility perception? Begin by conducting a mindset audit. Identify recurring thought patterns, creating both opportunity awareness and artificial limitations. Practice perspective flexibility by deliberately adopting multiple viewpoints about challenging situations. Establish mindset maintenance routines that systematically expose your thinking to expansive rather than restrictive influences. Engineer your information environment to support possibility-focused rather than problem-focused mental patterns. Remember that mindset muscles, like physical ones, develop through consistent challenge rather than comfortable confirmation. Feed your mindset quality by studying how history's most consequential innovators maintained expansive possibility perception despite seemingly insurmountable constraints. Hyman Rickover contemporaries perceived absolute safety barriers to certain energy applications. He maintained fundamentally different possibility perceptions. When conventional wisdom declared specific engineering challenges unsolvable, when institutional forces resisted exploring unproven methodologies, when resource limitations threatened project viability, his possibility mindset never wavered. Not through ignorance of legitimate concerns, but through perspective discipline that consistently detected potential pathways invisible to limitation-focused observers. His mindset architecture wasn't about blind optimism, but strategic perception management that consistently illuminated solution paths obscured to conventional perspective. The technological breakthroughs emerging directly from his possibility-oriented mindset eventually transformed entire industries that would have remained stagnant had he adopted prevailing limitation perceptions. Are you currently allowing artificial mental barriers to establish your achievement parameters rather than using mindset to expand possibility landscapes? What opportunities might become visible if you deliberately shifted perspective from limitation documentation toward possibility detection? Could your greatest current frustrations actually reflect perception patterns rather than genuine barriers? Might your most significant achievements await just beyond mindset limitations currently masquerading as external obstacles? Consider this fundamental reorientation perhaps. Success appears elusive not because external conditions oppose you, but because internal perception patterns haven't aligned with its requirements. The truth remains that circumstances influence your trajectory primarily through the mindset you maintain about them. Your possibility expansion begins with perception transformation. When you fully comprehend that conditions don't limit possibilities, but mindset determines which possibilities register as viable, that's when genuine liberation begins. Your extraordinary possibilities await your mindset cultivation. Discipline bridges dreams to achievement. Your aspirations transform from wishful thinking to tangible reality solely through the bridge of unwavering discipline. Imagine this construction process. Mundane daily actions accumulating into monumental achievements. Unremarkable routines crystallizing into remarkable results. Invisible daily commitments manifesting as visible accomplishments. This discipline architecture doesn't announce itself dramatically. It operates quietly, repeatedly, reliably, building your success infrastructure while everyone focuses on more exciting activities. What once lived only as imagination eventually materializes into circumstance through discipline's unglamorous consistency. Those who master discipline discover a transformative truth. They need not possess extraordinary talent, because they've developed the extraordinary consistency that makes talent irrelevant. Why does discipline create this dream manifesting power? Because achievement operates as process rather than event, regardless of field or ambition. Historical examination of exceptional performers reveals not unusual ability, but unusual behavioral consistency. Your discipline determines which skills receive development, what relationships get maintained, which opportunities become accessible, and ultimately what aspirations become achievable. When you recognize that discipline functions as achievement's primary ingredient rather than its occasional accompaniment, suddenly consistent action becomes not personality dependent but success essential. Most significantly, discipline mastery prevents momentary motivation from dictating your achievement trajectory by establishing action systems independent of emotional fluctuation. So how do you develop discipline powerful enough to transform even your most ambitious dreams into reality? Start by identifying your current discipline anchors, those areas where you already demonstrate consistency regardless of convenience or mood. Practice progressive discipline expansion by systematically installing new habit patterns around existing consistency nodes. Establish environmental triggers that initiate action sequences before motivation or willpower become relevant to the decision. Engineer your physical spaces and social circles to support rather than sabotage your most important discipline commitments. Remember that discipline muscles, like physical ones, develop through consistent small challenges rather than occasional heroic efforts. Feed your discipline quality by studying how history's most consequential contributors maintained extraordinary consistency amid circumstances far more challenging than yours. Satoshi Omura, brilliantly talented contemporaries, pursued sporadic research based on shifting interests. He maintained unprecedented consistency, investigating specific biological compounds despite minimal initial recognition. When exciting diversions tempted attention from methodical investigation, when funding patterns favored flashier research directions, when publication opportunities rewarded dramatic proclamations over meticulous verification, his discipline architecture never wavered. Not through superhuman willpower, but through systematized action patterns that continued functioning regardless of motivational fluctuation. His discipline mastery wasn't about personality traits, but process design that eventually yielded medical breakthroughs that would have remained undiscovered had he allowed emotional variation to dictate research consistency. Are you currently treating discipline as a personality trait you either possess or lack, rather than a systematizable process available to anyone? What achievements might materialize if you redirected focus from motivation cultivation toward consistent action architecture? Could your greatest unfulfilled aspirations actually reflect discipline, insufficiency, rather than capability limitations? Might your most meaningful accomplishments await just beyond discipline barriers, currently registering as inspiration deficits? Consider this fundamental reframing. Perhaps success appears distant, not because you lack necessary qualities, but because you've underestimated how thoroughly discipline determines which qualities become necessary. The truth remains that talents influence achievement, primarily when discipline converts potential into performance. Your dream manifestation begins with disciplined installation. When you fully comprehend that success requires not better dreams, but better discipline, that's when genuine transformation begins. Your extraordinary achievements await your disciplined action. Your environment shapes your evolution. Your development trajectory becomes virtually predetermined by the environmental influences you consistently expose yourself to. Visualize this profound influence, absorbing thought patterns from your 5 closest relationships, adopting standards from your most frequented communities, internalizing values from your regular information diet, and developing ambitions based on your visibility horizons. This environmental architecture doesn't announce its shaping power. It operates invisibly, continuously, cumulatively, molding your becoming while you remain barely conscious of its influence. What once appeared as personal choice increasingly reveals itself as environmental imprint. Those who master environmental design discover a transformative truth. They need not rely solely on willpower because they've learned to structure surroundings that naturally pull them toward desired outcomes. Why does environment wield this extraordinary developmental influence? Because human beings evolved as profoundly social organisms, continuously adapting to their surroundings. Historical analysis of exceptional contributors reveals not unusual willpower, but unusual environmental crafting. Your surroundings determine which ideas receive regular exposure, what behaviors seem normal, which opportunities become visible, and ultimately what person you become. When you recognize that environment functions as fate's architect rather than neutral backdrop, suddenly surroundings engineering becomes not optional enhancement, but developmental necessity. Most significantly, environment mastery prevents accidental influences from shaping your evolution by establishing intentional rather than default surroundings. So how do you design environments powerful enough to naturally propel you toward your highest aspirations? Begin by conducting an environmental audit. Identify which current surroundings most strongly influence your thinking, standards, habits, and aspirations, both positively and negatively. Practice deliberate exposure management by systematically increasing contact with growth-catalyzing influences while reducing contact with progress-inhibiting ones. Establish environmental reboot protocols for quickly reconstructing optimal surroundings after disruption. Engineer your physical spaces, relationship networks, information sources, and visibility horizons to consistently expose you to examples and standards slightly beyond your current level. Remember that environmental muscles, like physical ones, strengthen through consistent cultivation rather than occasional consideration. Feed your environmental quality by studying how history's most consequential figures systematically structured surroundings that naturally facilitated their development towards specific objectives. Jonas Salk, equally brilliant contemporaries, embedded themselves within conventional research environments. He deliberately engineered radically different surroundings conducive to breakthrough thinking. When traditional laboratory structures reinforced established methodologies, when academic environments rewarded incremental rather than revolutionary approaches, when professional communities penalized paradigm-challenging perspectives, his environmental architecture created protected space for unconventional exploration, not through rejection of legitimate standards, but through intentional cultivation of surroundings where different questions could be asked. His environment mastery wasn't about isolation, but strategic influence selection that eventually facilitated medical breakthroughs that would have remained undiscovered had he allowed default research environments to determine his thinking patterns. Are you currently leaving your most powerful developmental force, your environment, to random chance rather than strategic design? What transformations might naturally occur if you deliberately engineered surroundings aligned with your highest aspirations? Could your greatest unfulfilled potential actually reflect environmental mismatch rather than personal limitation? Might your most significant evolutions await just beyond environmental reconstructions currently registering as merely optional changes? Consider this fundamental reorientation. Perhaps development appears challenging not because you lack necessary qualities, but because you've underestimated how thoroughly environment determines which qualities naturally emerge. The truth remains that willpower influences growth primarily until environmental design renders willpower largely unnecessary. Your evolutionary acceleration begins with environmental engineering. When you fully comprehend that becoming depends less on better intentions than on better surroundings, that's when genuine transformation begins. Your extraordinary evolution awaits your environmental mastery. Communication mastery creates connection. Your relationships transform from superficial exchanges to profound connections solely through communication mastery. Envision this transformation: expressing complex ideas with crystal clarity, resolving conflicts through productive dialogue, inspiring action through compelling language, and creating understanding across significant differences. This communication architecture doesn't develop automatically. It emerges through deliberate skill cultivation, through consistent practice, through thoughtful refinement until eventually your words build bridges where barriers previously existed. What once registered as persistent misunderstanding now transforms into consistent comprehension. Those who master communication discover a transformative truth. They need not accept connection limitations because they've developed the expressive capacity to create understanding across virtually any divide. Why does communication create this connection-building power? Because relationships operate as fundamentally linguistic constructions regardless of context or participants. Historical analysis of exceptional leaders reveals not unusual charisma, but unusual linguistic precision. Your communication quality determines which ideas get accurately transmitted, what connections become possible, which conflicts find resolution, and ultimately what collaborative achievements emerge. When you recognize that communication functions as relationship architecture rather than mere information transfer, suddenly expression mastery becomes not social nicety, but essential infrastructure. Most significantly, communication mastery prevents superficial exchanges from replacing genuine connection by establishing linguistic patterns capable of expressing authentic understanding. So how do you develop communication powerful enough to build connections across even significant differences? Start by identifying communication patterns currently creating both understanding and misunderstanding in your important relationships. Practice perspective taking through deliberately adopting the linguistic frameworks of those you struggle to understand. Establish regular feedback loops that reveal gaps between your intended and actual message reception. Engineer your expression patterns to proactively address predictable misunderstandings before they occur. Remember that communication muscles, like physical ones, develop through consistent practice rather than theoretical knowledge. Feed your communication quality by studying how history's most unifying figures maintain dialogue effectiveness across profound differences that typically terminate productive exchange. Maya Angelou, equally passionate contemporaries, struggled communicating across significant social divides. She developed extraordinary linguistic bridges that created understanding where others found only frustration. When historical grievances blocked productive dialogue, when fundamentally different life experiences created seemingly incompatible perspectives, when emotionally charged topics defied analytical discussion, her communication architecture maintained effectiveness, not through diluting difficult truths, but through expressing them in frameworks accessible to those with radically different starting positions. Her communication mastery wasn't about pleasantry, but precision that eventually facilitated social transformations that would have remained theoretical had she allowed communication barriers to determine connection possibilities. Are you currently accepting certain relationship limitations as inevitable, rather than as communication challenges awaiting better linguistic approaches? What connections might become possible if you redirected focus from proving correctness toward creating understanding? Could your greatest relationship frustrations actually reflect communication insufficiency rather than inherent incompatibility?
Might your most meaningful collaborations await just beyond communication barriers, currently registering as irreconcilable differences? Consider this fundamental reframing. Perhaps connection appears impossible, not because differences are too great, but because communication approaches haven't matched those differences' complexity.
The truth remains that differences limit relationships primarily when communication fails to bridge them adequately. Your connection development begins with communication mastery. When you fully comprehend that understanding requires not agreement but effective expression, that's when genuine transformation begins. Your extraordinary connections await your communication development. Gratitude transforms perspective completely. Your entire perception shifts fundamentally when gratitude becomes your dominant mental mode rather than occasional emotional response. Imagine this transformation, finding abundance where others see scarcity, noticing progress amidst apparent setbacks, experiencing contentment within ambitious striving, and discovering opportunities within challenges. This gratitude orientation doesn't emerge through occasional appreciation. It develops through systematic thankfulness practice, through deliberate benefit identification, through consistent blessing documentation, until eventually your perception automatically illuminates gifts within every circumstance. What once triggered complaint or comparison now generates genuine appreciation. Those who master gratitude discover a liberating truth. They need not wait for perfect circumstances because they've learned to extract meaningful value from any circumstance. Why does gratitude create this perspective transforming effect? Because appreciation functions not merely as response to blessings, but as revealer of blessings previously invisible to complaint-oriented perception. Historical examination of exceptionally effective individuals reveals not unusual advantages, but unusual appreciation for common advantages. Your gratitude practice determines which assets receive recognition, what progress gets celebrated, which opportunities become visible, and ultimately what satisfaction becomes accessible regardless of conditions. When you recognize that gratitude operates as perception filter rather than mere emotional response, suddenly thankfulness cultivation becomes not optional pleasantry, but essential navigation. Most significantly, gratitude mastery prevents circumstantial deficiencies from dictating your experience quality by establishing appreciation rather than acquisition as fulfillment's primary source. So how do you develop gratitude powerful enough to transform even challenging circumstances into appreciation opportunities? Begin by conducting an advantage inventory. Systematically document benefits you regularly enjoy but rarely acknowledged across physical, relational, opportunity, and resource dimensions. Practice contrast consideration by regularly reflecting on how your current conditions would appear from less advantaged perspectives. Establish daily gratitude rituals that direct attention towards specific blessings before engagement with daily challenges. Engineer your information consumption patterns to regularly expose you to circumstances that contextualize your difficulties within broader human experience. Remember that gratitude muscles, like physical ones, develop through consistent exercise rather than occasional inspiration. Feed your appreciation quality by studying how history's most consequential contributors maintained extraordinary thankfulness amid circumstances far more challenging than those typically triggering your complaints. Viktor Frankl, contemporaries focused primarily on damage documentation. He maintained fundamentally different appreciation patterns that detected meaning possibilities within even the most adverse circumstances. When conventional therapeutic approaches emphasized limitation analysis, when cultural narratives reinforced victim identification, when personal history suggested permanent psychological damage, his gratitude architecture remained operational, not through denying legitimate suffering, but through illuminating previously unrecognized gifts accessible even within that suffering.
His gratitude mastery wasn't about forced positivity, but perspective. Discipline that consistently detected meaning dimensions invisible to complaint-oriented observation. The psychological healing approaches emerging directly from his appreciation-oriented perspective.
Are you currently allowing circumstantial imperfections to determine your experience quality, rather than using gratitude to extract meaning from any circumstance? What perspective shifts might naturally occur if you systematically redirected attention from what's missing toward what's present? Could your greatest current dissatisfactions actually reflect appreciation deficits rather than genuine circumstantial problems? Might your most satisfying experiences await just beyond gratitude barriers currently registering as legitimate complaints? Consider this fundamental reorientation. Perhaps fulfillment appears elusive, not because conditions oppose it, but because appreciation practices haven't developed sufficiently to reveal it. The truth remains that circumstances influence satisfaction primarily through the gratitude lens through which you perceive them.
Your experience transformation begins with appreciation, cultivation. When you fully comprehend that fulfillment requires not perfect conditions, but practiced gratitude, that's when genuine liberation begins. Your extraordinary perspective awaits your gratitude development.
Your habits determine your destination. Your life's ultimate destination emerges not from occasional inspired actions, but from the small habits you repeat daily. Envision this cumulative power, minor health choices accumulating into vibrant energy or chronic disease, small learning practices compounding into wisdom or stagnation, tiny relationship investments growing into profound connection or isolation. This habit infrastructure doesn't announce its trajectory-determining influence. It operates silently, consistently, predictably, carrying you toward inevitable destinations while you remain focused on more immediate concerns. What initially appears as insignificant routine eventually reveals itself as destiny's architect. Those who master habit design discover a transformative truth. They need not rely on motivation or willpower because they've developed automated systems that naturally deliver their desired outcomes. Why do habits wield this extraordinary destination-determining power? Because life follows compounding principles where small, consistent actions produce dramatically different long-term results. Historical analysis of exceptional achievers reveals not heroic willpower, but strategic habit architecture. Your routines determine which skills receive compound growth, what relationships enjoy consistent investment, which opportunities become accessible through preparation, and ultimately, what person you inevitably become. When you recognize that habits function as automated destiny rather than mere convenience, suddenly routine design becomes not optional improvement, but essential navigation. Most significantly, habit mastery prevents momentary desires from derailing your long-term trajectory by establishing automated behaviors aligned with ultimate objectives. So, how do you design habits powerful enough to deliver you to your most desired destinations? Begin by conducting a habit audit. Identify which current routines are carrying you toward and away from your ultimate objectives. Practice habit stacking by anchoring new behaviors to existing automated sequences. Establish implementation intentions that specify precisely when and where key habits will execute, removing ambiguity that enables procrastination. Engineer your physical environments to make positive habits require less friction than negative alternatives. Remember that habit muscles, like physical ones, develop through consistent small repetitions rather than occasional maximum efforts. Feed your habit quality by studying how history's most consequential contributors systematically structured daily routines that virtually guaranteed their eventual success regardless of motivation fluctuation. Margaret Hamilton, equally brilliant contemporaries, approached work inconsistently based on inspiration or deadline pressure. She maintained extraordinary routine discipline that produced unprecedented software reliability. When industry standards accepted error inevitability, when deadline pressures encouraged procedural shortcuts, when overnight coding marathons represented admired heroics, her habit architecture operated differently, not through superhuman discipline, but through systematized routines that automatically generated exceptional quality regardless of external circumstances. Her habit mastery wasn't about personality traits, but process design that eventually delivered technological breakthroughs that would have remained impossible had she relied on inspiration rather than installation.
The mission-critical systems emerging directly from her habit-driven approach eventually transformed entire industries that previously considered certain reliability levels unachievable.
Are you currently focused on motivation cultivation rather than habit installation as your primary success strategy? What results might automatically materialize if you redirected energy from willpower development toward routine design? Could your greatest unfulfilled aspirations actually reflect habit insufficiency rather than capability limitations? Might your most meaningful achievements await just beyond habit barriers currently masquerading as motivation deficit? Consider this fundamental reorientation. Perhaps success appears elusive, not because you lack necessary qualities, but because you've underestimated how thoroughly habits determine which qualities become expressed. The truth remains that intentions influence outcomes, primarily until habits render intentions largely irrelevant. Your destination mastery begins with habit engineering. When you fully comprehend that achievement requires not better goals but better systems, that's when genuine transformation begins. Your extraordinary destination awaits your habit design. Focus diminish what you accomplishments result directly from what captures your consistent attention rather than your sporadic intentions. Imagine this selection power, deliberately directing mental energy towards specific objectives while excluding countless distractions, maintaining concentration on long-term priorities despite immediate temptations, investing premium thinking hours in highest value activities regardless of convenience. This focus architecture doesn't establish itself naturally in a distraction-saturated environment. It develops through intentional attention management, through strategic elimination, through disciplined prioritization, until eventually your mental resources automatically deploy toward genuinely important rather than merely urgent matters. What once scattered across countless interesting but ultimately unproductive paths now channels into fewer but exponentially more consequential directions. Those who master focus discover a transformative truth. They need not accomplish everything because they've learned to accomplish the vital few things that genuinely matter.
Why does focus create this accomplishment determining effect? Because attention functions as your scarcest and most valuable resource, regardless of other assets or abilities.
Historical examination of extraordinary contributors reveals not unusual talent, but unusual concentration. Your focus allocation determines which opportunities receive development, what problems find solutions, which relationships experience deepening, and ultimately what contributions materialize from your potential. When you recognize that attention operates as achievement's primary currency rather than its occasional facilitator, suddenly focus management becomes not productivity technique, but essential strategy. Most significantly, focus mastery prevents trivial many from displacing vital few by establishing attention allocation systems based on significance rather than convenience. So how do you develop focus powerful enough to consistently accomplish what matters most amid endless distractions? Start by conducting an attention audit document where your focus actually goes, rather than where you believe it goes across typical days. Practice ruthless elimination by systematically removing activities that consume attention without producing proportional value. Establish distraction defense protocols that create protected space for deep concentration on your most important work. Engineer your digital and physical environments to make focusing on priorities require less willpower than surrendering to distractions. Remember that focus muscles, like physical ones, strengthen through progressive challenge rather than random exertion. Feed your concentration quality by studying how history's most consequential contributors maintained extraordinary attention discipline amid circumstances far more challenging than typical modern distraction. Rachel Carson's knowledgeable contemporaries dispersed attention across numerous worthy causes. She maintained unprecedented focus, investigating specific ecological relationships, despite minimal initial public interest. When exciting diversions competed for limited attention, when broader environmental issues offered greater visibility, when social pressures encouraged addressing immediately popular concerns, her focus architecture held firm, not through rejection of legitimate alternatives, but through strategic concentration on specific ecological warning signs invisible to diffused attention.
Her focus mastery wasn't about ignoring worthy causes, but depth prioritization that eventually catalyzed environmental awareness breakthroughs that would have remained unrecognized had she allowed scattered attention to determine her contribution pattern.
Are you currently measuring productivity through activity volume rather than focused accomplishment of genuinely important objectives? What breakthrough contributions might emerge if you deliberately narrowed attention toward fewer but more significant priorities? Could your greatest unfulfilled potential actually reflect focus fragmentation rather than capacity limitation? Might your most meaningful achievements await just beyond focus barriers currently registering as time constraints? Consider this fundamental reframing. Perhaps accomplishment appears limited, not because insufficient time exists, but because available time hasn't been protected through disciplined focus. The truth remains that capabilities influence achievement primarily when focus converts potential into performance. Your accomplishment expansion begins with attention concentration. When you fully comprehend that success requires not more hours, but better focused hours, that's when genuine transformation begins. Your extraordinary accomplishments await your focus mastery. Curiosity opens doors to new worlds. Your horizons expand exponentially when genuine curiosity replaces comfortable certainty as your dominant mental mode. Envision this exploration effect, discovering insights where others see only established facts, uncovering opportunities where others accept apparent limitations, developing innovations where others maintain conventional approaches, and finding connections between seemingly unrelated domains. This curiosity architecture doesn't preserve itself naturally amid efficiency-optimized environments. It develops through deliberate question cultivation, through comfort zone expansion, through assumption challenging until eventually your perception automatically detects possibility spaces invisible to certainty-oriented observation. What once appeared as settled reality now reveals itself as merely current understanding awaiting deeper exploration. Those who master curiosity discover a liberating truth. They need not accept existing boundaries because they've developed the questioning capacity to transcend them.
Why does curiosity create this horizon expanding effect? Because exploration functions not merely as information gathering, but as reality expansion beyond current understanding limitations.
Historical analysis of breakthrough contributors reveals not unusual intelligence, but unusual questioning persistence. Your curiosity quality determines which assumptions receive examination, what possibilities get considered, which connections become visible, and ultimately what innovations become conceivable. When you recognize that curiosity operates as reality's expander rather than mere personality trait, suddenly question cultivation becomes not optional characteristic, but essential navigation. Most significantly, curiosity mastery prevents artificial limitations from constraining your possibility landscape by establishing exploration rather than acceptance as your default response to apparent boundaries. So how do you develop curiosity powerful enough to consistently uncover opportunities beyond conventional perception? Begin by conducting an assumption inventory. Systematically identify beliefs you currently hold without conscious examination. Practice beginner's mind cultivation by deliberately approaching familiar situations as if encountering them for the first time. Establish regular reality testing protocols that empirically verify rather than theoretically accept critical assumptions underlying your field. Engineer your learning routines to consistently expose you to disciplines and perspectives significantly different from your core expertise. Remember that curiosity muscles, like physical ones, develop through venturing beyond comfortable knowledge territories rather than deepening existing certainties. Feed your question quality by studying how history's most transformative innovators maintain childlike wondering despite expertise development that typically calcifies perception. Richard Feynman's brilliant contemporaries worked within established frameworks. He maintained extraordinary curiosity that questioned foundational assumptions others considered settled understanding. When conventional approaches accepted certain phenomena as ultimately mysterious, when disciplinary boundaries discouraged crossing established domains, when professional incentives rewarded working within rather than questioning paradigms, his curiosity architecture continued generating questions others overlooked. Not through rejection of legitimate knowledge, but through persistent wondering about aspects others considered fully explained.
His curiosity mastery wasn't about ignoring established understanding, but question quality that eventually facilitated scientific breakthroughs that would have remained undiscovered had he allowed conventional certainties to constrain his exploration boundaries.
Are you currently accepting apparent limitations as inevitable realities rather than treating them as invitations for deeper questioning? What discoveries might emerge if you systematically challenged assumptions currently operating as invisible constraints? Could your greatest unfulfilled potential actually reflect curiosity insufficiency rather than opportunity limitation? Might your most significant contributions await just beyond curiosity barriers currently functioning as unexamined certainties? Consider this fundamental reorientation. Perhaps innovation appears scarce not because possibilities have been exhausted, but because curiosity practices haven't been cultivated sufficiently to reveal them. The truth remains that knowledge limits possibilities primarily when curiosity fails to transcend existing understanding. Your horizon expansion begins with question cultivation. When you fully comprehend that breakthrough requires not better answers within paradigms, but better questions about paradigms, that's when genuine exploration begins. Your extraordinary discoveries await your curiosity development. Authenticity creates unstoppable momentum. Your impact expands dramatically when genuine authenticity replaces strategic conformity as your operating principle. Envision this alignment power, expressing perspectives others think but hesitate voicing, pursuing paths others admire but fear attempting, creating work others appreciate but rarely encounter, and building relationships based on genuine rather than curated identity. This authenticity architecture doesn't establish itself automatically within approval-oriented environments. It develops through deliberate congruence cultivation, through rejection tolerance, through self-acknowledge deepening until eventually your external expression naturally reflects your internal reality, regardless of popularity consequences. What once appeared as risky deviation now reveals itself as your unique contribution pathway. Those who master authenticity discover a liberating truth. They need not compete within crowded, conventional territories because they've accessed the uncontested space of their genuine self-expression. Why does authenticity create this momentum-generating effect? Because alignment between internal reality and external expression eliminates the extraordinary energy drain created by maintaining incongruence. The historical examination of transformative contributors reveals not unusual conformity, courage, but unusual energy conservation through congruence. Your authenticity quality determines which ideas receive your full expression, what work contains your distinct perspective, which relationships experience your genuine presence, and ultimately, what unique contribution emerges from your singular combination of traits. When you recognize that authenticity functions as energy multiplier rather than mere self-indulgence, suddenly congruence cultivation becomes not optional lifestyle but essential strategy. Most significantly, authenticity mastery prevents wasted capacity from diffusing your impact by establishing expression alignment with your genuine nature rather than prevailing expectations. So, how do you develop authenticity powerful enough to generate momentum even against cultural currents? Start by conducting a congruence audit. Identify areas where external expression significantly differs from internal reality across work, relationships, and self-presentation dimensions. Practice rejection inoculation by deliberately expressing minor authentic perspectives likely to generate disagreement. Establish regular realignment rituals that reconnect daily decisions with core values when social pressures create drift. Engineer your relationship environment to include individuals who appreciate your authentic expression rather than requiring your conformity. Remember that authenticity muscles, like physical ones, strengthen through surviving rejection rather than avoiding it. Feed your congruence quality by studying how history's most distinctive contributors maintain genuine self-expression amid circumstances far more punishing of deviation than those you typically encounter. Mary Leakey's knowledgeable contemporaries pursued investigations aligned with popular theories. She maintained unprecedented authenticity following evidence pathways incompatible with prevailing narratives. When professional advancement required supporting established chronologies, when research funding flowed toward confirming rather than questioning accepted timelines, when peer recognition demanded methodological conformity, her authenticity architecture never wavered. Not through rejection of legitimate standards, but through unwavering commitment to inconvenient evidence, even when it contradicted career-enhancing narratives. Her authenticity mastery wasn't about rebellious positioning, but congruence commitment that eventually facilitated anthropological breakthroughs that would have remained undiscovered had she allowed conformity pressures to determine her investigation boundaries. Are you currently pursuing directions based primarily on external validation patterns rather than internal authenticity signals? What distinct contributions might emerge if you redirected energy from impression management toward genuine expression? Could your greatest unfulfilled potential actually reflect congruence deficits rather than capability limitations? Might your most significant achievements await just beyond authenticity barriers currently functioning as social acceptance concerns? Consider this fundamental reframing. Perhaps distinctive impact appears elusive not because you lack necessary qualities, but because conformity patterns prevent your genuine qualities from finding expression. The truth remains that originality requires not better imitation, but better authenticity.
Your momentum generation begins with congruence cultivation. When you fully comprehend that distinctive contribution emerges not from perfecting similarity, but from expressing difference, that's when genuine transformation begins.
Your extraordinary momentum awaits your authenticity commitment. Adaptability ensures survival and success. Your continued relevance amid accelerating change depends entirely upon development rather than knowledge accumulation. Visualize this evolutionary advantage, implementing new approaches while others defend outdated methods, exploring emerging domains while others protect established territories, embracing unfamiliar tools while others perfect obsolete techniques, and forming fresh mental models while others fortify aging assumptions. This adaptability architecture doesn't establish itself naturally within comfort-optimized psychology. It develops through deliberate flexibility cultivation, through change embracing, through continuous experimentation until eventually your operating system automatically updates in response to changing conditions rather than defending against them. What once triggered resistance now ignites curiosity. Those who master adaptability discover a sustaining truth. They need not fear obsolescence because they've developed the evolutionary capacity to remain relevant amid any future landscape.
Why does adaptability create this survival ensuring effect? Because environmental conditions change at accelerating rates regardless of individual preferences.
Historical analysis of enduring contributors reveals not unusual knowledge depth, but unusual updating frequency. Your adaptability quality determines which emerging opportunities become accessible, what disruptive changes become navigable, which new domains become explorable, and ultimately what continued relevance remains possible regardless of environmental transformation. When you recognize that adaptability functions as perpetual relevance rather than occasional adjustment, suddenly flexibility cultivation becomes not optional enhancement, but existential necessity. Most significantly, adaptability mastery prevents comfortable competence from becoming fatal constraint by establishing continuous evolution rather than achieved expertise as your operational mode. So how do you develop adaptability powerful enough to remain relevant amid increasingly rapid change? Begin by conducting a flexibility audit. Identify areas where you currently resist updating despite evidence suggesting necessity. Practice controlled discomfort through deliberately placing yourself in unfamiliar situations requiring new skill development.
Establish regular assumption testing protocols that systematically challenge mental models that may have expired without your awareness.
Engineer your information environment to consistently expose you to emerging trends and tools before they become mainstream requirements. Remember that adaptability muscles, like physical ones, develop through regular stretching beyond psychological comfort zones rather than occasional forced adjustments. Feed your flexibility quality by studying how history's most enduring contributors maintained relevance across dramatically changing environments that rendered their contemporaries obsolete. While Katherine Johnson's contemporaries resisted transitioning from manual calculation methods to emerging computational approaches, she maintained extraordinary adaptability, embracing new tools while preserving fundamental principles. When established mathematicians defended traditional techniques they had mastered, when institutional momentum favored familiar methods despite emerging alternatives, when professional identity remained linked to expertise in approaches becoming obsolete, her adaptability architecture continued evolving, not through abandoning mathematical foundations, but through flexibly applying those principles using radically different methodologies. Her adaptability mastery wasn't about trend chasing, but evolutionary discipline that eventually facilitated space exploration breakthroughs that would have remained impossible had she allowed procedural attachment to override functional advancement. Are you currently protecting expertise in potentially obsolete approaches rather than developing adaptability toward emerging alternatives? What continued relevance might become possible if you redirected energy from defending established knowledge toward exploring unfamiliar territories. Could your greatest future challenges actually reflect flexibility deficits rather than capability limitations? Might your most significant contributions await just beyond adaptability barriers currently functioning as comfort preferences? Consider this fundamental reorientation. Perhaps future success appears uncertain, not because emerging realities exceed your capacity, but because adaptive practices haven't been cultivated sufficiently to navigate them. The truth remains that knowledge ensures relevance primarily until environmental changes render that specific knowledge obsolete. Your perpetual relevance begins with adaptability cultivation. When you fully comprehend that enduring value requires not better expertise within paradigms, but better evolution between paradigms, that's when genuine sustainability begins. Your continued significance awaits your adaptability development. Decide today that your peace is untouchable. Fortify your mind, master your emotions, and watch as pain and doubt lose their power. The world cannot break what is unbreakable. Build that strength, protect it fiercely, and let nothing and nobody steal your peace again. Your mind is your fortress. Defend it.